Hey there, so I'm here picking up my layer feed from Bender Farms in Norlina, and I go to a farm called Bender Farms. I buy it through somewhere else, but you know, I'm here with Jeff Bender, the owner and farmer here, and he's got a lot to say about a lot of cool stuff. So I have a decently long interview here and hope you guys enjoy. It was a little bit windy today, and I hope that the audio is okay. Hey, so I'm here with Jeff Bender, and we're at his farm, Bender Farms, and this is where I get all of my feed from, and I just want to introduce Jeff and have you talk a little bit about your story of the farm and you know why you're doing what you're doing. And I have to say, Jeff is one of my favorite farmers. No joke, every time I meet Jeff,
how many farmers do you really know? So.
Not that many in person, but more so online, but that's true, Jeff, that's true. But yeah, every time I talk to you, Jeff, I feel like I take something really strong away from it. So thank you. So let me ask you a couple questions.
Sure.
All right, Jeff, tell me a little bit about your background and you know your story and how you either got into farming or continued being into farming and that sort of thing.
My dad bought this farm in 1946 and operated it. And I grew up just loving growing things. I loved everything about what he did. And so it just seemed like it was the thing that I've always wanted to do since I was old enough to have any idea of what to do. And so I went to NC State and graduated with a degree in animal science and agriculture in 1985 and came home. I did work a public job for 1 year with a crop consulting company and just decided that I was tired of looking at other people's crops and I wanted to grow my own. So I came home in 1986 and I farmed full-time ever since then. My dad was at a point then in which he was retired from farming, so I pretty much just stepped into the farming operation, this was a small farm. My dad had a very typical Eastern Piedmont, Eastern North Carolina farming operation in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And so just small acreages, but he made a good living and raised 5 children, and all of us went to college and have all done, I think, reasonably well.
So your farm growing up was very different than it is now, right? In
a lot of ways, yes. I don't know that he ever had more than 30 or 40 acres of any kind of crops altogether. You know, his basic source of income was 8 acres of fluke-ear tobacco. Because that was in the heyday of tobacco production. It was a profitable crop and you could make a good living on it, growing it. And that's all gone now.
Right.
So.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about that, and I obviously, not being from the South, you know, learned a lot about tobacco just in our short conversations. So what size are you operating now, and what are you growing, and what are you producing?
Right now we farm about 450 acres. About half of that is on the farm here that we own, and about half of it is leased from neighbor farms. All of it's, the furthest field that we have is probably 3 miles away, so we don't farm a big geographical area on purpose. I mean, I've never pursued trying to get large. We don't live in a part of the country that, in my way of thinking, you know, is conducive to trying to farm huge acreage, because you have to do so much traveling, and you know, it's just too expensive to do that. Some farmers are able to do it, some farmers have tried and failed. I didn't want to be in the latter category, so we've tried to work hard on vertically integrating and increasing the value. We were in the dairy business from 1990 to 2007, thinking that we could raise the crops and actually market them through milk. And while that was a very satisfying, we enjoyed the dairy business. We were really pleased, proud of what we produced. The economics of it in the South are terrible. And finally, the opportunity to get back in the tobacco production gave us an opportunity to get out of the dairy business. When the tobacco program, federal program, went out in 2005, it essentially allowed anybody who wanted to grow, who could get a contract with a company, to grow tobacco. And tobacco is a very high value, intensive, relatively small acreage crop. And so we grew tobacco. This is the first year since then that we have not grown it, because it has gone kaput. And that's another whole long story we don't need to go into. So at the same time we were doing that, we were increasing our acreage and trying to develop markets for produce. And so we're fairly, you know, we're not huge by any means, but this year we'll probably have 40 or 50 acres of various produce crops. And then our grain crops, we're trying to get to the point that we market them all through the feed program.
Okay, so yeah, let's talk about the feed program. That's how we've connected.
Yes.
And I'm just so happy that that connection's been made, and really been happy with your feed, and just, you know, great to support you and what you're doing. So can you talk a little bit about that and what goes in your, your products and, how you're selling them? Is it mainly just through the feed store?
Well, I'm gonna step back a few years.
Okay.
When all the genetically modified seeds started coming out in the late 90s and in the early 2000s, we did plant various genetically modified or Roundup Ready or GMO seeds of both corn and soybeans. And in certain situations, in certain areas, they were very helpful. It helped us to be able to battle certain weed infestations that we weren't having any success trying to control otherwise. But they're not inexpensive. The seeds are very expensive, and of course you can't save your own seeds, so if you do, you take a great risk by doing that. And then probably about, I don't know, 6-7 years ago, when we were starting to have a lot of problems with resistant weeds to glyphosate or the active ingredient Roundup. And so we were having to spend additional money for weed control, which was when they first started producing Roundup Ready stuff, you had almost 100% weed control, and Roundup was very cheap, and so it was a low expense. So you didn't mind paying a lot of money for the seed because you were saving a lot of money elsewhere. Well, when you started having these resistant weeds, and you had to spend a lot of money to control weeds, suddenly that expensive seed you started wondering, why am I spending twice or 3 times as much for seed as I could going conventional? And so it was kind of one of those, on the cartoon strip, they'd have a bubble with a light bulb going on kind of a deal. Sitting at the computer one spring, and I said, why am I doing this? I raised conventional crops for 20 years before they ever came out. I can certainly do it again. And so we went back to conventional crops on both corn and soybeans for that reason. And then one day we had corn in the bin, and it's all kind of I don't know why, I just decided to put an ad on Craigslist that I had conventional non-GMO shelled corn for sale, and we started getting calls. And so that eventually morphed into meeting some people who put us in contact with various other people, and they put us in contact with Melinda Fitzgerald, a Country Farm and Home in Pittsburgh, and she had expressed an interest in trying to find a local source of non-GMO feeds. And so we talked and met several times and came up with a plan, and a little over 2 years ago we started marketing feeds that are produced primarily with our grains, non-GMO, and then we're not set up to process soybeans because you have to roast soybeans and then you have to press the oil out of them, and that's a fairly expensive equipment. So we buy the soybean meal, the protein supplement for our feeds, from a grower in eastern North Carolina, Jeremiah Jones, down in Beulahville. He raises pastured swine, and he's 100% non-GMO as well. And so it still conforms to our 100% non-GMO ingredient list. We also, at the time, through some research online, found Crystal Creek Nutrition, it's in Wisconsin, that they produce both organic and conventional mineral packages. But in talking to Dan Leiterman of that company, they have nutritionists on staff to balance the rations for us, and we buy the minerals from them. So if you buy poultry feed from us, it has our ground corn and ground barley or wheat or whatever it is in it. It has Jeremiah's soybean meal, and then we use the minerals from Crystal Creek, and then of course potentially some other minerals like calcium carbonate that we put in there as well.
Cool. So besides the minerals, it sounds like all the other ingredients are either from your farm or from a farm somewhat nearby.
Correct. Yes.
That's unbelievable.
100%.
I mean,
yeah.
as a consumer or as a small farmer who's using your product, that makes me so happy, and my customers love it as well.
Well, we are trying to, we went into the business with a very bare bones budget. We just didn't feel like spending a lot of money to put in a lot of facilities until we knew what kind of a sales potential we had. And so we're still kind of on that, but we've purchased a used stationary mill that we're going to try to get put in place with a new facility this fall, which will increase our productivity and efficiency, and so make it easier to make feed, more efficient labor-wise. I don't know that we'll cut our labor costs so much, but it'll make the job on them much easier than what we're doing now. And now that we've had some volume, a couple of years of sales in it, we feel comfortable that we can invest a little bit more money into it. And of course, we hope it grows. We can continue to do that.
Absolutely. So I know that you do a lot of row crops too, but I want to talk about the feed primarily. So I know I buy layer feed and starter feed from you for poultry. What other feeds do you guys make?
Well, we make a whole line of poultry feeds. We have a 22% broiler starter, a 20% pullet starter, 18% broiler grower finisher, and a 16% layer. We also have produced custom blends for people. If you buy a half a ton or more, we have produced an 18% layer for some people that had, maybe it was duck eggs actually. And then we're going to be producing a 28% starter feed for turkey poults coming up soon. So all I had to do is call my nutritionist and tell them what our ingredients and what our parameters are, and they can figure up a ration. We just need to have enough volumes so that the mill will do an adequate job of mixing the feed. 1,000 pounds is about the minimum amount we can do.
Okay, so.
And we also pretty much manufacture to order. So Melinda, all of our feeds are sold through Country Farm and Home because I'm just not interested in having another accounting nightmare of keeping up with sales tax and everything. So everything we do, if you buy our feed, you're actually buying it from Melinda at Country Farm and Home. We just manufacture. She's our only customer, technically. But of course, we regard anybody who uses our feed as our customer. And I've always told everybody that they're anytime welcome to call us up and talk about it, have any questions at all whatsoever.
Yeah, you've been awesome about that, especially just ingredients and
sure.
You know, being really upfront about it. So what percentage of the operation here is feed for you guys now?
Oh, of gross sales, probably. Well, it's hard to separate because the gross sales include the sales of the grain that we actually produce on the farm. So if you include that the feed sales include a percentage of our grain sales, it's probably 25 to 30% of our gross
so that's
sales.
Significant.
Oh, it's very significant.
Yeah.
And we'd like that to grow. In terms of the amount that we do, you know, we add value to that grain. So that part above if we just took the cost of grain out, then the balance of that's probably more in the 10 to 15% range.
Okay. Well, Jeff, that's, you know, it's really interesting, someone who's been in agriculture for a long time, to just be changing over time and doing what makes sense for you and your farm and how you want to grow. And I think that's awesome. Well,
you know, when we started the dairy farm in 1990, my wife and I were still fairly idealistic kids back then. You know, we had every intention of retiring as dairy farmers, and the economics of it just didn't work. You know, agriculture has changed just exponentially in my lifetime. It is just so much consolidation, both not only in farms and farm sizes, but in farm supplies. I mean, when my father was farming, he had a half a dozen different farm equipment, not only dealers, but various brands he could buy from, and now we're down to 2 or 3. You basically have 1 or 2. There's very little competition for my dollar that I spend, and very little competition for what I produce. Commodity markets are just controlled by just a handful of players. And so corporate America is just strangling the small farmer. That's why I'm really enthused by small farmers like yourself, by small producers that we deal with. It's, you know, I'm disappointed sometimes in other farmers who don't seem to regard the population, people who question food production. They're our customers, and we should take their concerns seriously. Instead, we're too influenced by the corporate America that wants us to buy these products. I mean, that's the whole GMO quandary. Was if it had been marketed as a kind of a prescription type thing for certain problems, it wouldn't have been overdone. We wouldn't have the issues, but corporate greed convinced Monsanto and the other people that were doing it to just push it on out there, and now it's so widespread that consumers, as far as I'm concerned, rightly have concerns.
Yeah, so we were talking a little bit off camera before we started about the importance of people knowing how to grow food, or farmers, you know, getting their hands dirty, that sort of thing. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of that moving forward? It's like, you know, for my generation and people younger than me?
I think that pretty much all generations really in this country have been lulled into complacency, because in our lifetimes, and I'm 56 years old, there's never been a question about food availability. That's not to say there aren't people who've gone hungry because of maybe the price, you know, but on average, we've never had a situation in this country that I can remember, certainly not in my lifetime, where food wasn't available. Grocery stores have always been well stocked, and on average, the average American can feed themselves with the smallest percentage of their disposable income of any country in the world. What that has done is people have started taking it for granted. But agriculture and the food production industry is, you know, aside from clean water, it's really the only industry that we can't do without. You know, if they stop producing cars for a year, most likely nobody's going to die. If they stop producing video equipment or computers, you know, it may be a hardship. People on this guy, we stop producing food for a year, it's going to be tough. I mean, people are going to die. People are going to starve. People are going to be really hungry. And we don't have this huge reserve of food. I think people have this idea that we have this huge surplus of food. We have a surplus of food on any given day, but it doesn't last.
Or if the weather comes in and changes things.
There's no 7 years worth of grain in storage like the biblical, the Egyptians had. It's not like that. We run out of corn and soybeans within a few months either way of when the next crop comes in. And so we're one blight, one disease on corn and soybeans away from a crisis, really. And so farming, I've been farming, I'm 56, I've probably been farming for 50 years. And when I was a kid, I would just do my little things in the corner of the garden. And I've been farming full time for 35 years. Every year is different. Every year I learn something new. Every year there's no, at least around here, there's no cookie cutter. And so what we're losing by the farmer population shrinking, we're losing that expertise. And the problem with that is that computers, at least right now, don't learn. They take what is given. There's a generation now that seems to believe that everything we need to know can be held in their hand, or at the very least on a laptop. And we're discounting the value of the ability of a person to have a skill. And that doesn't apply just to farming. All the trades and all these things have that, all professions. But farming is just so much more critical. Because again, if you could just imagine what would happen to the country if we had a crop failure. And I mean a crop failure in a big way. And it is, in my opinion, very poor policy to have an economic system that is continuing to push farmers out of business and having fewer and fewer people producing an essential product that everybody needs. I mean, everybody eats. There's no exception there. And we're having fewer and fewer people producing that. And that, to me, is just fundamentally scary. I have a new granddaughter who's a year old, and I'm fearful for what the world will be like when she gets to become an adult, because they're relying on fewer, and you to a point in which the majority of the food and fiber in this country is produced by enough farmers that a few football stadiums will hold them. Now that ought to scare the hell out of anybody.
Yeah, so what do you think in moving forward, what should we all be trying to push for? Is it smaller, more local farms? Is it just more decentralization of the food system? You know, like
all of the above.
Okay.
I mean, both of those, some way of bringing some profitability back into it that gets to the farmer. The food system has a lot of profit in it, but it all stops before it gets to the farmer. You know, you know, the agribusiness companies are making money. The agri-equipment companies are making money. The people that process the food, and so they're all making money. The farmer is the only one that is not guaranteed a profit. Everybody I do business with here on this farm has a profit margin built in so long as I pay my bill. I don't have that. People talk about the farm bill. The farm bill is squat. You know, people talk about, you know, 85% of the farm bill is going to uses that don't come to the farmer. You know, really the only benefit from the farm bill anymore is that they subsidize crop insurance, but crop insurance is of marginal benefit. So there is no real support for agriculture, despite what the common people think is common knowledge. It's just not the case. So I hear people on the news or people talk about, you know, the farmers are getting the dole. I don't get it. I don't know who's getting it, but I'm certainly not getting it. Farm program payments were a couple percentage points of our entire income last year. I don't think that quite hardly, I mean, it was certainly something we could have done without. It wasn't something that without it we would have failed. So it's not that important. But what it is important is that as a consumer, as a person who cares about the future of your family and your country, food security is being put at risk. And the difference is this: my father had the farming operation he had 50 years ago, made a good living. Now to do the same thing, he'd have to be 10 times bigger, at least. And that is just insane.
Yeah. So Jeff, thanks for everything that you do. I'm just so appreciative of being able to connect with you and get feed from you. But hopefully some people took some cool information out of here. And you know, my audience is generally just all over the place, from gardeners up through small farmers and homesteaders. And so it's interesting, you know, we work on very different scales and very different kinds of operations. And I always just, as I said, I love to talk to you and hear your background and sort of, you know, things that you see trouble in the ag industry and what we want to do moving forwards.
I would love to have an opportunity to have a forum for people to discuss this, have interactions, because
you gotta get online more, man.
Yeah, well, I'm old school. It's a problem. But you know, agriculture applies to everybody, and I can't say that enough. It is something, there's nothing more central in everybody's life in this country than agriculture, because it feeds you. And if you take it for granted, it will come back to haunt you. You know, I think the population has taken it for granted for too long. And if they don't start having, and I would love to have a conversation. I would love to, people who disagree with what I say, or people who want more information. I'm no authority. I just have 30 years of experience of what I have viewed and seen is happening in farming.
Well, hopefully this will help get some of that message out. And you know, I just love the discussion. I love sharing information. That's one thing I really promote, is just sharing and trying to make the place better. And
well, that's all we can do.
Yeah, right.
Well, all right.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Hey, so that was awesome as usual. I love talking to Jeff. He's got always so many cool things to say. And Jeff offered, if you guys have a lot of questions or you want to sort of start a discussion or whatever, leave them down below. And if we get a bunch of stuff together, I'll bring them over to Jeff and we can do a follow-up interview. So if you're looking to get some of this feed that I use, it's as we talked about, it's a non-GMO feed with North Carolina ingredients. You get it through Country Farm and Home, and they're in Pittsboro. I'll definitely leave a link down below for their website. And it's just awesome. I've just been super happy with it. For me, Jeff's farm is about 55 minutes away, and the feed store is about 45 minutes away. And I get a lot of great stuff from them too. So if you're anywhere near Pittsboro, go check out their store. I pick it up here. It's about equidistant. So, but I do pay for everything through Country Farm and Home. So anyways, with that, hope you enjoyed this and you took something out of it and maybe started thinking about some stuff. So with that, guys, thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Like the video, share with your friends, all that stuff. We'll see you in the next one.
Well, I always like to, my standard story is I started these little funny mushrooms, you know, people that little funny cigarettes. The insanity of coming back into farming.
And we can take a million takes, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
The film's cheap.
Okay, yeah, that's right. That's right. See, that's a different thing when I was even in school.
Let's get this done here.
All right.
I'll chop all this out anyways.
Yeah, you're gonna edit this, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Take out all the stuff where I'm umming. And anytime, you don't have to order it.